What it meant is that we had no idea what was happening when we were on Facebook. Like we would send out all of our ads, people would sign up, we'd see them in our system like, hey, we got leads. But then when you look at your tracking, Facebook would probably report 20 out of 100, about 20% of our traffic was reported. And so we spent a bunch of time and a bunch of money developing like our own way to track.
What's up, Model FAs? David DeSell here, CEO of Model FA and your host of the Model FA podcast. And we are joined here today by Jonathan Musgrave, who you may have heard of before. He is the founder and CEO of Steep Digital Marketing. And I'm very excited about this conversation, not only to learn about Jonathan's background, but also him and his company have probably, and Jonathan, I'm not just saying this, one of the most unique offerings being rolled out that I've come across, and I'm really excited to share that with the advisors tuning in, learn more about it myself. So with that said, welcome to the show.
Thanks, man. Honored to be here with Model FA and listen to a ton of your content. I feel privileged to be here so thanks so much, man. Appreciate it.
All right, well, let's rock. So I'm sure you did not graduate from school and say, I'm going to start a marketing company for advisors. What was kind of your journey from leaving school up until now? Like, what were those 2 or 3, 10 steps in between?
Well, I joke with people that my goal out of college was to become as unemployable as I possibly could be. So that started off when I was in high school. I actually finished high school at a really small private school a semester before I was supposed to. So the last semester of high school, my parents were like, what are we going to do with this kid to keep him out of trouble? And I'd always had this dream of flying. So I talked my parents into letting me get my pilot's license at the age of 16 and actually learn to fly about 2 months after I got my driver's license. So that was my goal, was to become a pilot and fly. That just so happened to be like 2 months before 9/11. And so as soon as that happened, like the pilot market is flooded with, United pilots with 10,000 hours that can't get jobs, and some kid's not going to get a job there. So instead, I decided to apply my skills to becoming a journalist, and I wanted to write for a newspaper. And then, wouldn't you know, like right around college time is when like all the print basically went offline. Like half the papers in Colorado went out of business. I got offered a job out of college at a newspaper that doesn't exist anymore called the Rocky Mountain News for $30,000 to be a beat writer for them. And was like, yeah, it's maybe not going to even pay for an apartment in Colorado. So kind of just took what I could get at that point. And I started working. My first job out of school was there's a wholesale company here that wholesales annuities and life insurance. And I was hired to be the 7th employee there. And they're like, you're our marketing director. And you learn pretty quick when you're like pushed into a situation at a small business with a lot of responsibility as a young kid. You just kind of got to figure stuff out. So that's what I did. And really, from that point on, I've just literally done nothing except for serve advisors through marketing. And that started off in direct mail, kind of evolved into like some TV and radio. Eventually, I thought I knew everything about that business to start my own wholesale company, which was a very expensive and hard learning process. And then throughout that process, despite the struggles I had, started to learn that digital was really a up and coming thing in the space, and kind of diverging away from a lot of my experience in print. And so in 2017, I started Steep just fully to be a digital marketing company, no affiliation with the wholesale group, not selling any products, not recruiting, any of that, just strictly event marketing for financial advisors. And of course, our product set has grown since those days. But yeah, 17 years makes me feel old saying that, just done nothing except for working in the financial space. But one of the things I learned is that even though you look back and like, oh, I had all this formal education in X, Y, and Z, and it doesn't really apply to this, I think if there's one thing that's like undervalued in today's space, it's just communication skills. And specifically in the marketing world, it's so important. And so some of my journalism classes paid off in the long run. It just took me a while to figure out how to apply them.
Do you still fly at all today, or have you hung up your wings, so to speak?
My license is inactive right now, so I would have to go take like a biannual flight review. But if I could turn my camera 90 degrees that way, you can see the tower of the airport that I learned to fly at. So I look out my window all day seeing guys on jets, wishing I was one of them. But one of these days I'll get back into it.
It's pretty wild that right after you're like, 4 wheels, that's a little bit too easy. Let's get rid of those and go up in the air. And also wild timing as well, right around September 11th. Like, I feel like you were late to the party twice as it relates to becoming a pilot and a journalist based on how things changed around those times.
Something's happened for a reason and it takes you a while to figure it out. But I love what I'm doing now. It's just, you know, life sends you curveballs. And it's funny, like you go to a room, like you and I both go to conferences all the time, meet hundreds of advisors. And I've seen people do this, like raise your hand if you went to school to become a financial advisor. Like literally almost nobody does. So everybody has this serendipitous path to get to where they are. And it's just collect some cool experience along the way.
I'm curious to know. So when you went to start your wholesaling practice, excuse me, and or business, and you said it was I forget the exact words, but an expensive learning lesson.
Yeah.
Oftentimes, that would discourage someone from starting a business. And I remember when I left being a financial advisor and got into consulting, a lot of the feedback that I got from folks, because the first 6 months I made no money. Like when I was an advisor, I was the proverbial landscaper that cut his lawn last, if at all. So I did not practice what I preached when I was an advisor. So I left that business, had basically no money in savings. I had no revenue from consulting. And after wearing a suit and tie for 7 years, I played consulting during the day and I drove for Uber from 7 to 11 p.m. at night. And all the people around me, mom, dad, aunts, uncles, friends, extended family, the common feedback I got was just go get a job, get your feet back underneath you, and then go do this thing. And I was so stubborn, and stubbornness isn't necessarily a good quality, but in this instance, I think it was so stubborn in that no, to the word you used, I wanted to be unemployable, and I gritted it out. And fast forward to today, and life is pretty good. So I'm curious to know from your experience in the wholesale business and that not working out, what kept you going to try it again, in a different business and not just go get a job?
Well, I think first and foremost, like I love the financial advisory space. Like the people that you get to work with are, to me, they're people who push me forward. And you see advisors, some of the clients we work with, the guy I'm talking to this afternoon on a webinar we're doing, a single practitioner does over $200 million in new business every year. Like that is exceptional. And there's almost no other situation where I would be able to interface with people who are doing business at a high level. And even though our businesses are different, like being able to rub shoulders with people like that, like essentially entrepreneurs like myself who are doing this game at a higher level is a really unique opportunity in our space. So I think one is just like kind of falling in love with the industry for one. The other thing is that when I was at the wholesale company that I started, um, we did $100 million in total business in the last year I was there, which in the wholesale space, when you're working on like tiny margins, it sounds like a big number. It's not. It's not actually a lot of revenue, but we did see 100% growth year over year the final 2 years that I was there, and 100% of that came from the marketing we were doing for advisors. Really, the breaking point for me. There's a guy who's a client of mine just about 20 minutes south of here in Colorado. He called me up. He's like, "Hey, Jonathan, I want to take you out and play golf." And I'm like, "Cool, this is fun." Like, I don't really know why this guy wants to golf with me. So we're on the range playing, getting ready to play. And I was like, "Hey, just out of curiosity, why are we hanging out today?" I'm like, "I'm happy to hang out and play golf anytime. I don't need much of an excuse." But he's like, "Jonathan, you played such a huge role in my business." He's like, "I'm kind of part-time in this business, just write some annuities." He's like, "But I had my best year ever at $8 million, and 100% of that came from your marketing. And I just wanted to thank you for that." And I said, I looked at him, I'm like, "Jim, like, I'm glad that this is really productive for you. But I pulled up you in my system this morning and you wrote $70,000 of that $8 million with me." And I'm like, I could see that business coming in through our marketing and then going somewhere else from a relationship standpoint. I'm like, this is kind of a crappy business where you don't control how you get paid. And so that's frustrating. I think when you're like the girlfriend on the side relationship like that, it's really, really challenging. And so I feel like marketing allows me to have a real impact in people's business, but also do it in a way that where I'm not necessarily a relationship competitor with people who, quite frankly, are probably a lot better at that than I was.
So when you started Steep Digital, and what was it? You said 12 years ago, 13 years ago. It was in 2000, what?
2017. So it's been about
Oh,
7 years now.
okay,
Yeah.
7 years. Excuse me. I
Yeah.
I misheard. So 7 years ago, 2017. And when you say events marketing, we peel back the onion. I'm assuming that at that point in time, it was basically running seminars, educational seminars for advisors. Is that a fair representation?
That's correct. 100%.
Okay. Um, so then 2020 happens,
You had to bring
and
that up.
salt on an almost healed wound.
Yeah. Right.
So then 2020 happens, and I'd imagine you're like, crap, this is the wholesale business all over again. I might trip and fall, and maybe not get back up. How did you guys remain resilient and pivot during that time period and not close shop like so many people did?
Well, our business was really blessed to have grown really quickly from like November 2017 through the end of, I guess, 2019. We had grown from me in my basement with a laptop to a team of 18 people, over $10 million in revenue. And so we had, really solid team. We had great products, had a really good customer base. And what I found out of COVID is that in a weird way, it was both a step back and a step forward at the same time. The step back is obviously, we're trying to get a group of 50 somethings, 50-year-old somethings into a room for a live event. That was something that like the CDC and literally nobody wanted to happen. But it was also a step forward because I think it forced adaptation, forced adoption of technology for the senior demographic that we're targeting. I don't know if you had looked at like pre-COVID that anybody 55, 65 years old would have like wanted to interact with a financial advisor through a web camera. And then all of a sudden it's like the only way for them to talk to their grandkids is to use FaceTime or, something on Facebook or some video tool. And all of a sudden interacting with people online became a little bit more normal for the older demographic that's typically tech resistant. And so it really opened the door for us to expand our skill set and start offering people alternatives. Within 2 months of COVID happening, we were doing 100, 150 webinar campaigns for our advisor base. So in a way, it was a really easy transition to go into essentially an online version of the event marketing we'd already done. Now it's just like, how do the tools and the process of communicating with people change? But over that time, we learned a lot. It was revenue from webinars was not the same for us for sure as it was with events, and it certainly wasn't the same for advisors. It was a big shift to learn, how do I convert virtually? But all that being said, it allowed us to expand our skill set. And I was listening. I don't know if you ever hear Ryan Dice. Ryan Dice did a really good talk at his traffic and conversions conference. He told the story about this company called Toast. Toast is like a software company that restaurants use to basically like get orders from the front of the house to the kitchen. And pre-COVID, that's all they did. Like they'd have a little POS where someone would key in, "Hey, you want a hamburger and fries?" And then they would make it and bring it out to you. Well, then COVID happens, restaurants close down, Toast is in a bad spot. So they launched this new application that would allow restaurants to take orders through their website without having to go through a delivery service like Uber Eats or DoorDash. And so coming out of COVID, eventually that was a really good thing for them. Now, instead of just having like this POS system at restaurants, now they've also got this online tool. And I think webinars was kind of that for us, where we came out of COVID with not just one, but two really powerful marketing strategies for advisors. So definitely kicking the pants during that whole time. But I don't know. I'm a pretty optimistic person. I like to see the good that comes out of challenge.
Well, and you alluded to this as you were searching for the word adoption, which is adaption and
Adaptation.
adapting. Uh, so I feel like you either die or you adapt when life throws you curveballs, whether it's a pandemic like that or any other business challenge that you experience. And if you can successfully adapt, it's almost like your brain creates new neural pathways and connections that you never would have thought were possible, while also simultaneously that happening with the marketplace as well, because it sped up the adoption of virtual interactions and it made it so that it wasn't weird. Like I remember, what was the program like when I was an advisor, and it was like I never used it because it was so go-to meeting.
Oh yeah.
Like I remember that, like that was like super weird and clunky to use, and people didn't really want to use it. It took forever to like load up when you clicked on the link, and now it's you hop on Zoom, you hop on Teams, and it's super, super easy. And frankly, I feel like the marketplace enjoys that. I wouldn't necessarily say more, but enjoys it because it allows folks to just be more efficient. Think about the time it takes to drive to the place where the meeting is. It's like now I used to hold as an advisor like two, maybe three meetings a day because I had the built-in drive time. Now, and this isn't healthy, but I can hold 10 meetings a day just back to back to back to back to back because I don't have to go anywhere. So it's cool to see how it's progressed. Did you see? I felt like there was a little bit of a change. So let me kind of explain this and kind of get your thoughts on what you saw. Where, all right, COVID hits, companies, not just in our industry, pivot to webinars. Okay. And then I noticed there was this like inflection point where I call it like webinar fatigue, where it's like,
Yep.
okay, another webinar, another webinar. But I feel like it's starting to and has come back where if the webinar is super, super valuable, people are more than happy to attend it. But there was this like little curve, over the last 4 years. Did you see that like in the data for when you guys were running webinars for folks that like started off hot, trickled down, and now it's kind of coming back up? Or did you notice anything different?
Well, I can tell you from sales volume, our sales volume took like our webinar sales went down as soon as live events came back because people were anxious to get back into live events. Last year, about 8% of our sales were webinars. This year, 20% of our sales are webinars. So, and during that time, our business 2x. And so our like year over year comparison of run rates for webinars now versus last year is probably effectively 4 or 5 times higher now. So I definitely think from the advisor standpoint, that's mainly what sales point. On the consumer standpoint, I think the best way to measure that is like conversion costs and attendance rate. And
Mm.
I think we saw those stay fairly stable. Part of it is just that we kept getting better and better with our process. One of the changes that we made is that like we're a Facebook certified marketing partner. That just means we're in the top 4% of advertisers nationwide. And so we spend a ton of money on traffic, pretty sophisticated way of doing it. But we found that like the 2 week runtime that we would run for a live event was way too long for an impulsive person who wants online information. Like people who are seeking info online are impulsive and they want to move right now. And so we pushed our traffic schedule from a 2 week lead time down to a 4 day lead time. So we're only running traffic for a few days before event. And that's really helped us to like kind of reward that impulsive nature. In terms of like the fatigue, what I tell advisors is if you're in a room with 40 people and you're giving a seminar, how many times does somebody stand up in the seminar and walk out the door because they're bored? It almost never happens. Like we have this unwritten social contract that when we're together in person, like you got to give that person your attention. But contrast that with what happens online. If you open up a YouTube video that's 15 minutes long, how often are you like bored 30 seconds into it and just click off? Like that, you can give somebody the middle finger and walk out of a webinar pretty easily without offending them, whereas in person you can't. And so that puts the impetus on the advisor, whoever's hosting the webinar, to do a really good job and be engaging, like you said. And so, I have the number one question people ask about webinars is how long should it be? And my question is always like, how long are you willing to watch TV? Like if you watch a Seinfeld episode that's 30 minutes, like without commercials, it's 20 minutes, or you'd watch Lord of the Rings, it's like 3 hours long. You'll watch both of them as long as they hold your attention the whole time. So that's really the guiding light here is like, if you can be engaging and entertaining and interesting and provide value from the start, then people are probably going to stick around. But it's one of those things that I still think the advisor base is really like grasping at trying to really get a handle of. But I see going forward, I wouldn't be surprised to see live events get replaced in terms of volume with webinar events, just because all the flexibility that you'd mentioned, the timeliness and like quite frankly, cost as well. It's a lot more efficient, but it's just how is a lot more important than what in these situations.
I'm curious to know. So you're in the top 4% of folks on Facebook, and is that based on ad spend, or what's that?
Yep, it's volume spend. Yeah.
Okay, out of curiosity, what do you guys spend a month or a year on Facebook ads? Because that's a testament to your ability to condense learning curves to change, because Facebook and their algorithms and the ad strategy, I'm sure, is always changing. And if you're, you know, spending $1 compared to spending $100,000 or more, it condenses your learning curve. Out of curiosity, what do you guys spend monthly or yearly on Facebook ads?
In most months, it's seven figures. Um, it just depends. Like we got a lot of seasonality in summer and the winter time, but in most months it's around seven figures. But I think if there's if there's a place where you can't afford to make a mistake, it's when you're spending money that fast. Like every single day, your Amex is running for a couple $10,000 or more. Um, what happened during COVID was like the biggest change to our business from COVID wasn't just COVID happening. That was also when Apple rolled out iOS 14, which blocked tracking like third-party pixels, which is exactly what Facebook's network has run on for the entire time. Just before 2020, Facebook had surpassed Google as the #1 advertising platform on the internet. Most people don't know that. More links, more link referrals or clicks to websites come from Facebook than any traffic source, and that includes Google and YouTube. And like right as Facebook's kind of at the pinnacle of volume, like really the trusted advertising source for online advertisers, Apple's like, hey, heads up, like the whole engine that runs your traffic, like we're going to delete that and not allow people to use that. So it didn't mean we couldn't display on Facebook anymore. What it meant is that we had no idea what was happening when we were on Facebook. Like we would send out all of our ads, people would sign up, we'd see them in our system, like, hey, we got leads. But then when you look at your tracking, Facebook would probably report like 20 of them, 20 out of 100, about 20% of our traffic was reported. And so we spent a bunch of time and a bunch of money developing like our own way to track. And so essentially the way it works now is like we don't even use Facebook's tracking. We've written our own code that like tells Facebook, hey, we got this lead, go find them in your system. And then we're able to get 100%. We're actually more accurate reporting wise now than we were pre-COVID. And that's just back to what we talked about earlier, which is sometimes like the best things happen out of the worst situations where like, hey, we've got a brand new way to optimize a pretty big traffic budget, but it's something we would have never figured out how to do unless we were forced by necessity to figure it out.
What do you find? And I don't know if it's different, if it's in person or online, but and I don't know if you want to share like exact language or kind of conceptually, but what are you finding the top advisors are doing and saying to convert folks to their calendar at the end of the seminar or webinar? So I'm sure that there's, or I know that there's an aspect of, are you interesting? Are you credible? Is there some humor involved to a degree? But like that last call to action at the end, like what are you seeing the best advisors do?
So our call to action at our workshops is always to come into the office. It's not a phone call. It's not a Zoom meeting. It's coming to my office for a real 1 hour conversation. So it's a little bit of a high barrier to entry. You know, you could probably offer free reports or, you know, some sort of other consults that would be a little lower barrier to entry. But essentially, advisors always are looking for in-person events to result in in-person appointments. But in order to convert that, what I have found is that, like, first and foremost, people show up to events to learn something, which means that us as the presenters, our impetus is to teach them something. So you really truly have to come with value. And I think the old days, like the dog and pony show that people are used to, where you're kind of flexing and saying some cool terminology, like that's not really going to land with people today. People really, really want to be informed. And so we always, like all of our programs, they come with presentations that we've created that we give to advisors. They have training. Some of them are taught by some of the top advisors in the industry. And so we do our best to help train people how to be engaging, interesting, and teach something. But I think really like the way that I look at workshops is that a workshop is essentially a first appointment. Like it may take 2 or 3 meetings to actually onboard a client. In my opinion, your presentation is essentially the first meeting, and it's an opportunity for you to show your value. And I think at the end of the day, what people buy is authenticity. Like somebody could stand up and talk about their life story for an hour and not really get too much into the financials, and people would still want to meet with them because they buy you as a person. And so I think being able to weave your story, your methodology, your philosophy into the content you're presenting is really critical. And that's one thing that I found. Like I would consider myself to not be a very good salesperson, but I really care about helping and serving people and giving them information. It just so happens that when you become that subject matter expert, like people want to engage with you. And there's a book I read called The Challenger Sale. And essentially tenet one of the Challenger Sale is like, tell somebody something they didn't know beforehand, offer them something valuable in the form of information. Now you've purchased the opportunity to elevate your status from a salesperson to a true solution provider. And that makes them almost in a sense of reciprocity inclined to interact with you. So I think that philosophy is 100% what you're doing in workshops is like, tell them something they didn't know, build up your perception as a subject matter expert. And then whatever it is you're doing as your call to action on the back end is just going to be semantics of getting that happening. But yeah, the best seminar presenters are the best teachers. And I used to, my old boss would tell me, if you're a teacher, like you're gonna get paid like a teacher. I think that's changing. I think today the way people buy is like they want to deal with authentic people. And I think, of course, persuasiveness and having like great personality, like those things help. But I really believe like when you lead with value, then people are gonna naturally reciprocate.
So what if I'm an advisor, I'm listening to this, and I'm teeing this up very intentionally. So I'm an advisor and I'm listening to this and I'm like, oh, I wish I could present for an hour. I just, I don't have that personality. I don't have that skill set. Um, what solutions do you have for them if speaking is not their forte?
Well, it would be awesome if they had somebody you could present with that. Yeah. Spoiler, we chatted about this before we talked, but so one of the interesting things that happened, like kind of coming out of COVID, is there was an independent filmmaker that came to us and said, "Hey, I've created a documentary style film about retirement, but I'm a filmmaker, I'm not a marketer, and I love for advisors to be able to use this as a tool to share it with people." And so we essentially became agency of record for this group, and we said we'll promote with the same engine we use to promote live events, these theater events. And it was actually kind of got, I don't know if coerced was the right word. Someone brought this idea to me and I was like, this is kind of silly. I don't think anyone's going to show up to a movie theater, watch something about retirement. Push play on our first campaign, which admittedly wasn't actually that good of a campaign. And our conversion rate was like 5x what our typical was. Like, this is a market we market all the time, really saturated, hard to get leads. And all of a sudden we've got 300 people signed up for a movie. So did we strike lightning in a bottle, or is this actually going to work? So we started doing more and more testing. Eventually we got to the point where we were doing 50 of these events a month, really, really high level of volume. And what we found is that people, even at scale, were 3 times more likely to attend a theater event than any other type of financial event. And the challenge we ran into in that situation is that at the end of the day, the movie was not ours. So there was limitations to what we could do to present it. Things like online or streaming, like lead generation, were a little bit outside of the purview of our contract. We could really only present live events. The other thing was the movie was a little bit product heavy, and it talked about stuff like really specifically that not every single practice wanted to talk about. And so we took a step back at the end of last year and we said, if we could create a film that we had the ability to do whatever we wanted, like we own the film, so we own the licensing, and we made sure that we told a story that helped advisors have the real conversation they want to have, like this could be a huge differentiator. So we actually pulled the trigger on that in December. And just in June, we premiered, like they had the very first showing of the film. It's called The Psychology of Retirement. And we worked with Morgan Housel, who's written the book, The Psychology of Money. It's a New York Times bestselling book, over 5 million copies sold. And Morgan's kind of like our subject matter expert in the movie that helps to guide the story. But really what the movie tells the story of is there's this really interesting dichotomy. The baby boomer generation is the most affluent generation in world history. Over 50% of all the money and assets in the United States lives with one generation. Interestingly enough, you ask baby boomers, like, how do you feel about retirement? And their number one concern is running out of money. So you've got this kind of tension here. You have more money than anybody, and you're still really worried about money. And essentially what we're posing as the question to be answered by the film is, like, what is the gap? And there's an interesting study LIMRA did a couple of years ago. It said that only 1 in 5 people have a written retirement income plan. And what we really explore in the film is this idea that accumulating assets isn't ultimately the goal. Like, knowing how to spend assets in retirement in a way that provides you peace and security through income is actually like the objective that most people are after. There's a ton of really good research-based information that shows that people who have stable incomes are a lot happier than people who have a ton of money. Even if that money could provide a higher income, people feel better. They're happier when they have income. And so really the story is all about what is an income plan? How do you create one? And we talk about some of the challenges to creating income. Of course, income is not a topic that lives in a vacuum. Things like market volatility and how much taxes you're going to pay and all of these peripheral issues affect income. And so we talk to experts, economists, authors. We talk to the former Comptroller General of the United States, the former director of the Social Security Administration, foremost leading expert in policy and tax risk, to really explore some of the issues that are at odds with income, and then really emerge on the back end of the film as like, this is what an income plan is and how you can create one. But it really tees up a conversation for that the advisor wants to have, which is, how do I create income? And at the end of the day, if you're in the retirement planning space, working with people 55 and older, you're essentially in the income planning space. So it really tees up the exact conversation you want to have. And then, of course, that dovetails really easily with what we do as an event marketing company, being able to get people signed up and showed up to events. It's just a different way of doing it. So it does, to your point, it does definitely take the stress off of the advisor. Like, you don't have to be up there and be a rock star for an hour. Most of the time, you're talking for 10 or 15 minutes at the beginning of the film, introducing yourself. The film plays for 58 minutes. And then on the back end, usually there's like a 5-minute appointment setting session. And so the whole thing's done in 90 minutes, and you're only really responsible for about half an hour of that time. So it's definitely a new way of doing things, kind of a differentiator, and makes it easier for advisors at the same time.
So what does the call to action look like? I know it's scheduling the meeting, but hey, hope you like the movie. Let's meet if you have any like what's the call to action sound like that you found is effective?
So usually it kind of like 90% of your conversion opportunity is actually at the beginning of the film. So the advisor will talk for about 10 or 15 minutes. Usually I encourage them to tell a story, kind of like the story you and I started. Like, this is how I got into here. It's kind of a little funny, interesting, get to know the advisor a little bit. Eventually, we're going to want to transition that story into your business and why you do what you do, what you're passionate about. And then what you really want to do is you want to draw a parallel between your practice and its mission and what the film is about, which in this case is all about income planning. So talking about how your film builds income, or how your firm builds income plans for consumers. And that's why you wanted to host this showing. So make it make sense to the consumer why you're there, like hosting a film. And then what I tell most advisors to do at the beginning is, like, we have these paper sheets, like literal physical paper, and it has like basic contact info at the top, and at the bottom is the advisor's schedule for the next 10 days. So we'll tell them, hey, in your packets, when you arrive, we gave you this piece of paper. For tax purposes, we want to document everybody who attended this event. So just fill out your name, email, phone number at the top of that sheet. Don't worry about anything else on that sheet for right now. We'll mention that a little bit at the end here. But just while the lights are on, if you can just fill that out, we're going to collect those from everybody at the end. So then the movie will play. And then at the end, when the advisor is saying, hey, look, if you learn something from this film, maybe you're in that. And the analogy we use in the film is the mountain, like the accumulation part of retirement versus the decumulation part. And in mountain climbing, you're more likely to have like an injury or some sort of mishap on the descent than the ascent, because more people put their effort and planning into climbing than they do on the descent. And so that's kind of the motif in the film. We filmed a lot of it up in the Cascades and like near Seattle. It's like some really beautiful imagery. But if you're that person who's here, maybe you've done the hard work of climbing, saving, but you don't really know how you're going to spend that. You're just going to pull money out of the cookie jar and hopefully the money's still there on the last day. Like, if that's the situation, that's really what we do at our firm. And if you'd like to meet with us, then we offer consultations at no cost for people who attend these movies with us. So if that is you, just check a box on the bottom of the form that shows a time that's convenient for you. Hand that to us on the way out the door. And so you've really done 90% of like the paperwork to get the appointment set at the beginning of the film. And at the end, it's really ticking a box. And then you want your team outside the theater to collect those and, confirm those the following morning. But it's actually a pretty native way to do it. There's some nuance to executing it, but we have advisors consistently booking 40-50% of the households in the room into appointments using that method. So it's, learning process. It took a while to get there. At first, we tried QR codes and a number of other things that didn't really work. Old school papers seems to be the best way to do it.
Any insight on that piece there? Because I would assume that QR codes would be effective because it's easy, but I can also see, as I'm talking out loud, that that's an easy thing to scan, have it on your phone and be like, I'll get to that later. And then they never get to it. Like, have you deduced kind of why they're not as effective? Is it what I just said or something different? Or still up to interpretation?
I think it's kind of just forcing people to make a commitment on your terms and the timing of it. I had a call yesterday. It's an organization like my friend did a triathlon. He's raising money for some cause, and they called me yesterday like, "Hey, do you want to donate?" And of course, I'm like, "Yeah, sure, I'm going to do it." And they're like, "Cool, we can either take your card on the phone or you can email. We'll email you a link. You can do it online." I was like, "Yeah, email me a link." Like I'm ready to do what I said I was going to do, but that email sitting in my inbox 24 hours later, I haven't touched
Mm.
it. Now I'm like, do I really want to do this? I'm starting like that buying resistance is kicking in. So I think just like people behave predictably in herds. And if you can like tell people this is what the herd is doing and be that shepherd that's like pushing them towards an objective, people are generally going to follow the instruction and direction. So I think it's just less loopholes. I mean, I've seen people use the QR code. It's like, oh yeah, David, I've got it on my phone here. I'm going to click on it and book it tonight. And guess what? They don't click on it and book it tonight. So it's just kind of like in the moment, force them to make a decision in a tactful way that's not off-putting.
Well, it's so interesting to hear you chat about this because like when I work with say an individual advisor and maybe one of the things that we're talking about is this particular person, is hung up in the process somewhere. And I'm like, okay, well, walk me through how we got to this point. Okay, consider doing this moving forward. Here's what you could have done looking back. But it's like so focused on that one individual. You guys, I would imagine, have such a clearer picture because you're able to see, like you said, what the herd is doing as a whole, right? Because if you're doing, I think you said at one point for I think it was about webinars, you were doing like 150 a month or something. Like that's a lot of data to be able to spot some commonalities between people's actions. So it's pretty interesting that you get to not focus on a particular consumer and why they did or did not do it, but rather looking at the bigger picture. It's just interesting to be in that position.
Yeah. I mean, my forte is definitely on more the creative side of advertising and not on the analytical side. I think anybody who's doing advertising at a decently high level needs to be adept at both functions. But data is something that it's interesting to study because you do see trends that just stand out like a sore thumb, and it helps you to differentiate in those conversations. Like, is this an isolated incident or is this a trend? It's the same way as an advisor. Like, if you pull out a stock chart today and you see today's price, like Apple's $400 a share, or whatever, is it up or is it down? You don't know. You need to know where it was and where it's going. And yeah, I mean, I tell advisors and our team all the time that we're almost like lifeguards, like on this unique perch that was way above the pool, and we can see people over here splashing around, floundering. We see people over here swimming like Michael Phelps, and like we have a unique perspective that enables us to share really valuable information from that experience for sure.
Love it. Well, you're the only person that I've come across in the event marketing space. And perhaps I'm out of the loop, but I don't think I am, that is taking this approach to pivot beyond seminars and webinars. Because like when you think about seminars and webinars, you're like, okay, well, what else could we do? Add a stake in the mix.
Mm-hmm.
But this is so related yet so different. I'm really excited to see how this continues to play out. One of the things, Jonathan, before we start to wrap up and let people know where they can learn more, one of the questions I ask all of our guests is a book that's had an impact on them. And it's our way of distilling a reading list for folks who are listening to the show and want to get better in some area of their life. And the book that you chose was Vivid Vision by Cameron Herold. I was just Googling it on my end, and if nothing else, I'm buying it right now just because it has a pretty cool looking cover to it. So they say don't pick a book by its cover, but I like the look of it, so I'm gonna get it anyways. So that'll be here tomorrow. But what's the impact that it had on you? Why should someone else get it as well?
Well, I think first of all, most books are about twice as long as they need to be. And you kind of understand the writer, especially in like the self-improvement business space. You kind of make your point in like 3 or 4 chapters. And then a lot of that's just kind of like filler. I think Cameron Herold, like it's a pretty short book. It's a really easy read. And for someone like me who's like super ADD and impulsive, like it was actually really easy for me to get through. First and foremost, it's a good reading experience. But what what I am not good at as a professional is like people like, what's your 5-year vision? What's your 3-year goal? Like all these plans. Like I'm a little bit of an impulsive person. I like see opportunity and I want to jump. So it's hard for me to say 5 years from now I want to be doing this because 12 months ago I didn't know I was going to be selling movies, and we're doing that right now. And so what Cameron's entire philosophy is that like for you to effectively run a team, and whether your team is 2 people or whether it's 50 people, or your team could be your clients, in order for you to effectively lead any group of people, you need to have some sort of guiding light that's showing you like this is where we're headed. And I think the example he uses in the book that's really good is like a mom and dad in the car with the kid going to college for the first time, and they're like driving 3 states away to get to, or I think he says New York to Los Angeles. And mom and dad fall asleep at night, kids on driving duty, like driving across the country. And he gets to some interchange in the middle of St. Louis that he's never been to before. He has two options. He either wakes up dad and says, "Hey, which highway do I get on?" Or he's like, "We're going to Los Angeles, which is way west. Like this sign says west on it. Like I can make this decision myself." And so the idea is that whether you know the exact nuance of the decision that you need to make, if you empower your team with the information of the broader picture of the why, the mission, the goal, then you're empowering your team to make micro decisions without having to rely on you. So it's not just about time management and that sort of thing, but it's empowering your staff to like understand and have the freedom to work inside of a broader context. So for me, as somebody who's not like that ultimate, like down to the minute planner, I'm pretty good at sharing a vision. Like this is where I see our company going in the next couple of years. And then it empowers, I think, our team and our clients to understand why we're doing what we're doing along the way. So I like it. I've seen Cameron Herold speak at a number of events, bought like some online courses from him. He's a really, really great speaker, really accomplished CEO. I think he like 2 or 3 companies took from like almost going out of bankrupt to going onto the Inc. 500 list. But he's a great writer too. And just, it's an easy read. I think you'll like it.
Well, I think too, for advisors, sometimes they're hesitant to build out their team. And I think a lot of times it's because they realize it's going to potentially create extra work for them because they picture themselves needing to be involved in all of those decisions. But what I'm hearing from you based on the book is what they really need is to do a better job of painting a picture as to where they're heading, to your point, empower the team. So I like that a lot. But if I'm listening to this and I'm intrigued and curious and want to learn more about how you could potentially help my business grow, if I'm listening to this as an advisor, where do I find you guys? What do you want me to do? Where do I go?
Well, I'm doing my best to sit in this chair and talk to the camera more and more. And I've done a pretty good job, not so much recently, of putting videos up on our Instagram. That's a really good place to just kind of learn about the company and what we do. So hopefully you have a smile and learn something watching the Instagram. But if you did want to chat with us, like our website's just stevedigital.com. And we have a team of success coaches. They're basically like account managers who also do sales. And so you really have like one point of contact here that's dedicated to like walking you through our process and coaching. And then, also for your listeners too, if you found value in this and something you're interested in, I'll offer like free copy of the movie to everybody who's interested in that. So if you just on our contact page, tell us you listen to the podcast, and we'll send you off a copy of the Psychology Retirement that you can watch.
Well, that's something we did not talk about in advance, and I'm very grateful for you offering. So thank you for that.
Yeah, it's part of being impulsive, man. I'll send you a copy too.
Please do. Awesome. Well, Jonathan, this was a pleasure. I'm excited for what you guys have in store, for the impact that you're having on the community, the impact that you're having on your team, and ultimately yourself and the company as well. So really appreciate you spending some time today, and we'll get you off this. I know you got a webinar, which by the time you're listening to it, the webinar will have already happened. So I don't think you're going to jump onto the webinar yourself, but I appreciate you spending some time with us.
Yeah, thanks, David. Super appreciate it. Happy to chat.
Awesome. Take care.
All right, thanks.